Why do you blame the Biden administration?
Because they let them in. Are you stupid? Are you a stupid person? Because they came on a plane along with thousands of other people that shouldn't be here, and you're just asking questions because you're a stupid person. And there's a law passed that it's almost impossible not to get them out. You can't get them out once they come in. And they came in, and they were unvetted, they were unchecked, there were many of them.
So after it's now been confirmed that the Washington, D.C. National Guard shooter was indeed an illegal migrant from Afghanistan brought into this country under the Biden administration, yeah, go figure, this week Trump is responding by announcing he will be ending all third world migration, as he calls it. So in other words, what does that mean? Maybe we should stop importing people from countries that not only are war-torn, but actively have an Islamic terror problem that's widespread, and much of the population resents the United States. Yeah, maybe that's just not a smart thing to do. And maybe your claims about how you're going to vet these people or you can reasonably screen when so much of the country feels that way is a bunch of garbage, as we just saw, for instance, in Washington, D.C. But he's not stopping there. The administration is also looking to potentially review millions of current visas and green cards of people who come from Afghanistan and some of those Middle Eastern countries to find any inconsistencies or problems, whether they're using government benefits, whether they potentially have criminal records or something is not right about the application, we'll say, is there potential fraud. All of this stuff clearly needs to be redone because I don't know if you've noticed, guys, I know it doesn't get talked about a lot, but there seems to be a growing Islamic terror problem in the West right now. It's almost like going back to 2014, 2015 all over again, if you remember back then, right? We just saw an ISIS terror plot get foiled in Michigan over Halloween. We saw this happen right now from an Afghan national. There was Boulder, Colorado earlier this year, and who could forget all of the car attacks over the past 2 years in Europe? This is a serious problem, and perhaps now is finally the time to admit, hey, if a problem is coming from a certain place, maybe you should, shut off the pipe, right? If you're having a big water leak, close the pipes before you can figure out trying to repair the situation. So anyways, we'll tell you about all of this here today. Again, the now confirmed identity of the Washington D.C. shooter. I mean, go figure. Initially, we speculated, hey, it could be a leftist. Well, it turns out it wasn't directly a leftist. It's just someone who was enabled to do this by a leftist. I mean, go figure, many such cases, as well as apparently how the Trump administration is responding and, of course, being called the evil, mean, bad guy for doing something that clearly makes so much common sense. So we'll get into it, guys. First, though, do us a favor. If you enjoy our content, make sure you hit that like button down below and subscribe to the channel if you are new. That's not only the best way to support our work, but it also ensures that you can stay up to date with all the latest news and coverage. And that said, so just to, start off, here is, of course, what we now know about the Afghan illegal migrant terrorist out of D.C. this week.
We've seen a difference in Washington, D.C. Crime is down
Hold on,
significantly.
Chairman, hold on. We just got this. I need to get to it. This just in, sources are telling Fox News that the shooter is an illegal immigrant from Afghanistan who came in during Operation Allies, welcome under the Biden administration, and he overstayed that visa. All right, Chairman, so Fox News is learning that this person was here illegally, overstayed his visa, and that's who this shooter profile is. What's your immediate reaction?
Well, my immediate reaction is we tried desperately to get an accounting of all the people that came from Afghanistan to the United States during that disastrous withdrawal during the Biden administration. That was a huge priority for the House Oversight Committee. We never got that information. We were never allowed to get that information because I don't think the government had any idea. I don't think they kept an accurate accounting. And if they did, I think they realized there were probably lots of gaps. We were told there were going to be about 2,000 people that had worked with our military as people that tried to help with the cause to help protect our troops in Afghanistan.
Right.
But then at the end of the day, there were closer to 100,000. But we don't know what that number was, and I don't think the government has kept good track of it. And I'm sure there were mistakes that were made.
Yeah, well, that's so typical of the Biden administration, is it not? They tell you, hey, we're just bringing in 2,000 or so Afghan collaborators who were our allies and helped us during the war. And then it turns out it's about 100,000 random Afghans that we really don't know much about. They could be Taliban, they could be Al-Qaeda, but hey, don't be a bigot, right? Don't be an Islamophobe. Don't ask too many questions, even if you're on the oversight committee of the House. That's not allowed. Now, here's what's really interesting about this suspect in particular. Is on one hand, he did come here by my understanding on a legal visa, but he overstayed that visa, never tried to renew it. So that's why we call him an illegal migrant. But that's only part of the story. Secondly, as you can see here from the Post-Millennial, according to intelligence sources, Ram Anula Lakanwal had established a working relationship with various American agencies, including the CIA. He served in the Afghan army and fought alongside U.S. Special Forces against the Taliban in Kandahar, a region central to counterterrorism operations, according to Fox News. Now, the 29-year-old entered the United States in September 2021, shortly after the Biden administration's disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan. He arrived under what was called Operation Allies Welcome, the federal program created to resettle Afghans who had assisted U.S. military and intelligence operations during the two-decade war, and was settled in Washington state. He ultimately ended up driving across the country to D.C. to shoot some National Guard members. So clearly a very good ally we had. Now, what the left and some of the contrarians are trying to say about this is, oh, well, he was vetted, right? Because he was a former, apparently, like a CIA asset. The government had tabs on him. They brought him over. So clearly there was no way we could have possibly seen this coming, right? He's not just some illegal, they're trying to basically say. He's not just some illegal who poured over the border. But to me, I look at this situation and say that's the exact problem. Because first and foremost, let me just say, this is not the first time that a former CIA asset from Afghanistan commits a major terror attack against the United States, if you know what I'm talking about there. His name is Osama bin Laden. He collaborated with the U.S. during the 1980s because he didn't want the Soviet Union invading. Yeah, it turns out that maybe was not such a good idea. So clearly, right, this whole idea, oh, CIA asset from Afghanistan, yeah, maybe you should learn lessons from history. But of course, that goes back to what we just talked about, right, with the neocons. The whole idea is to fight them over there so that you don't have to fight them here, and yet we're fighting them in both places. You know, they just lied to us. The first thing, honestly, America should have done after 9/11 was seal the border and really, heavily reform and restrict the immigration system. And yeah, apparently the Bush administration did the opposite. But anyways, that's on one hand. Secondly, though, this to me rings eerily similar to the debate around Syrian refugees, if you remember that from about a decade ago. Because the argument at the time that the Obama administration and the liberals were making, as by the way, Syrian refugees, especially in Europe, there were some cases in America, but especially in Europe, were causing widespread social problems. There was mass crime. There were many different terrorist attacks back in the 2010s, if you remember. But the excuse was, oh, we're going to vet them, right? We're going to make sure they're not ISIS or they're not Islamic terrorists. But it's like, how exactly can you even reasonably do that? Right? You say the word vetting, but you never explain what it means. Because sure, you can pull up some basic, say, CIA intelligence to say, okay, this person is not a card-carrying member of ISIS or Al-Qaeda or whatever. But how are you going to figure out what they think, right? Again, a country like Afghanistan, a country like Syria, you're talking about a place where wide masses of the population have beliefs that we would call radical, right? For instance, 99% of the population of Afghanistan, according to Pew Research, as of like 5-10 years ago, believes in Sharia law. We would all call that radical. They want a forcible implementation of Sharia law. So inevitably, right, when you're bringing over a mass population of people, there's a very high chance that's what you're going to get. And how are you going to vet for that ideology? How can you figure out what's going on in their head? You're going to give them a questionnaire. Hey, are you a terrorist? Do you support ISIS? Are you a jihadist? Obviously, they're going to check off no, right? That's why I say there is no actual, sincere, reasonable way to truly vet people. So you have to make a common sense understanding, especially given, by the way, we don't exactly have a friendly government like that of, say, Western Europe or Canada where we can share data with to figure out, hey, what's this person's record? What's this person's record? What is their background? That it probably makes much more sense, I would argue, with a country like Afghanistan to simply say, yeah, we cannot reasonably guarantee national security by allowing migration from this place. Maybe it ought to be cut off altogether.
And let me say one more thing, and it's not about this case. It's about vetting in general. The nonsense that the left gave us with this Operation Welcome Allies. Look, there was no vetting. If you think there was vetting, I have a bridge to sell you. If you saw the chaos that was going on on at that airport in Kabul in Afghanistan. It was typical of what was going on in the Biden administration. And the Pentagon, I believe it was Kirby and people in the Biden administration said the Afghan withdrawal that we all know was disastrous was a success. And that's a quote. They called that a success. That chaos is not a success. That is a nightmare. And 13 American servicemen and women were killed at that airport because the Biden administration couldn't get their facts together and couldn't make a decision regarding the rules of engagement to take down a known suicide bomber. So let's stop namby-pambing around with this, oh, he was vetted. There was no vetted. The welcome mat was thrown down. They even admitted that they short-circuited the vetting. What they did was they brought in 90,000 people into this country that were not vetted. They told us all the other immigrants were vetted. What do? Call the FBI in Afghanistan and say, gee, do you have anything on this guy? Did we call Venezuela and say, gee, how about your criminal justice system? What can you tell me about this guy? It's like the 10, 20 million American illegals who've been let into this country. We don't know who they are until we suffer the consequences that we have seen in Washington. And I was on that scene, and it is a very sad place. And Sarah Beckstrom and her family did not deserve this. They should have been protected, which is the first order of government. And the left ought to stop their nonsense.
Yep, exactly as I've been saying, right? What are you going to do? Call their FBI and ask them? They don't exactly have one, and if they do, they're not giving it to you. So I don't think there's genuinely a good faith way you can say we have a secure vetting process for any of these countries because it's logistically impossible. But even if there was, clearly the Biden administration even then still took a lot of shortcuts. And of course, that's why we are where we are with the situation. I would further point out, if I were to take a wild guess about this one terrorist, let me just say, just because someone is a CIA asset working in the Middle East does not mean they're not also a terrorist. Because let us not forget, right? The very leader in Syria, who's actually now in charge of the country, but the rebel leader was a former member of al-Qaeda. But they were trying to fight who? Bashar al-Assad, whose government we were against. I mean, that's a pretty normal thing where there's a radical Islamist, there's terrorists who maybe probably were against the Taliban for some whatever reason, right? So they were fighting. So we were kind of just trying to divide and conquer and do, U.S. policy there. But it doesn't necessarily mean those people like America either. And again, you want a prime example of a CIA asset turning on us. The most historic, notable example himself is Osama bin Laden. So please, again, get all this garbage out of your head about vetting or that even being possible or the Biden administration having done it. And I'd further like to point out here, guys, that this is not just an isolated incident of the problems with Afghan nationals causing crime in this country, being a huge dependency and a drain on, for instance, financial resources. I mean, it was just back in April where another Afghan migrant who was moved into the U.S. with his family launched a shooting attack on police in Fairfax, Virginia. Only about a 20-minute drive from Washington, D.C. and the Capitol where this attack happened during Thanksgiving week. So this is what we're dealing with, right? It is this common. And keep in mind, the Afghan population is not very large in the United States. And when you look at the per capita rate at which violence and terrorism seems to be happening, it's extraordinarily high. And I don't think that should be a big mystery to anyone, right? But apparently he made anti-white statements while he said he wished he had helped the Taliban. Oh, really? But he was vetted, right? Surely. Do you think he said that, by the way, while the immigration officers were vetting him? Obviously not. That's again here the problem. He shot 2 officers before being shot dead. And we've pointed this out as well, too, by the way. But when you look at, for instance, immigrant households and government dependency, whether that's SNAP, Section 8, for instance, we pointed out 45% of all Afghan households in the United States, almost half of all of them are relying on SNAP benefits. In other words, what did we do with the migration system? Import our own bankruptcy, right? Import a bunch of tax dependents who are going to take money more from the system than they're putting in. This problem is generally pretty large and significant in this country, but I'd like to point out among Afghan and Somali, those are the top 2. Right, who have been causing a lot of the most financial problems as of late for reasons that you could probably surmise. After all, they're coming from these war-torn countries that are highly dysfunctional, okay? So where do you expect, say, a lot of terrorism to be coming from? A lot of financial fraud to be coming from? A lot of just inability to live self-sufficiently to be coming from? Of course, it's going to be coming from the so-called third world migration that President Trump is pointing out. So that said, here is the brand new statement on apparently what will now be the response after watching, again, it turns out, multiple different terror attacks by Afghan nationals this year amidst, as I said, a sort of rising noticeable tide of Islamic terrorism in the West. Well, President Trump says a very happy Thanksgiving salutation to all of our great American citizens and patriots who have been so nice in allowing our country to be divided, disrupted, carved up, murdered, beaten, mugged, and laughed at, along with certain other foolish countries throughout the world for being politically correct and just plain stupid indeed when it comes to immigration. The official U.S. Census foreign population, foreign-born people, stands at 53 million people, most of which are on welfare, which we've covered, by the way. That number is actually close to 50%, right? When you count in the household, if their kids are receiving it, right? So most of them are on welfare. They're taking more money from the system than they're putting in from failed nations like Afghanistan, like Somalia, like Syria, right? Or from prisons, mental institutions, gangs, or drug cartels, i.e. Venezuela. Noticing a pattern here in terms of a bunch of countries where people came in to the United States from, in the past 4 years, right? Anyways, they and their children are supported through massive payments from patriotic American citizens who, because of their beautiful hearts, do not want to openly complain or cause trouble in any way, shape, or form. This is true. They put up with what has happened to our country, but it's eating them alive. A migrant earning $30,000 with a green card will get roughly $50,000 in yearly benefits for their family. So that's a drain of what? $20,000 on the tax system. You do the math on a wide scale among 53 million people, so about half of that population, so like 20 million. And please tell me, do you think that's going to cause, for instance, if you're a conservative, national debt to skyrocket or go down somehow? Of course, the national debt's going up. Even if you're a liberal. And this is the message I always try to make to the left. It's like, some of your ideas I'd be willing to at least have a respectful conversation about if you at least admitted, hey, if we want to have social programs, you need to have a way to ensure that more people are paying taxes into the system than taking out, right? And you guys, for whatever reason, are so obsessed with feeding all of the migrants of the world that, like, how do you expect, for instance, something like SNAP or Social Security or Section 8, any of these different programs that you like, welfare payments, whatever it is, it doesn't matter, okay? If there's more tax dependency than there is tax contribution from a bunch of the country, and you just keep on importing that, obviously social programs can't sustain either. So whatever you're passionate about, as I so often say, a lot of it ties back to immigration. You wonder why it's not working, right? You wonder why we can't have nice things in this country. It's because we're literally importing our own bankruptcy, as you're seeing right here, okay? I don't think it's any coincidence that social programs have come undone in the past several decades in most Western countries. Education has gone downhill in quality. Schools are sometimes overcrowded. That's often a complaint. The debt crisis is exploding. Where do you think all this stuff is coming from? It seems pretty obvious, right? The real migrant population, though, is much higher. This refugee burden is the leading cause of social dysfunction in America, something that did not exist after World War II. Failed schools, high crime, urban decay, overcrowded hospitals, something I didn't even notice, right? The healthcare, that's another thing to point out. Overcrowded hospitals, housing shortages, large deficits, etc. As an example, hundreds of thousands of refugees from Somalia, as we talked about here on the channel, are completely taking over the once great state of Minnesota. Somalian gangs are roving the streets looking for prey as our wonderful people stay locked in their apartments and houses, hoping against hope that they will be left alone. He says here the R word, right? The seriously retarded governor of Minnesota, Tim Walz, does nothing, either through fear, incompetence, or both, while the worst congressman/woman in our country, Ilhan Omar, always wrapped in her swaddling hijab, and who probably came to the USA illegally, in that you are not allowed to marry your brother, true, does nothing but hatefully complain about our country, its constitution, and how badly she is treated, when her place of origin is a decadent, backward, and crime-ridden nation, which is essentially not even a country for lack of government, military, police, schools, etc. And that is right, President Trump is the one saying all of this, okay? Pretty impressive. I mean, I'm not disagreeing. But isn't it great, right, to have a president who's willing to tell this truth? Because you could probably imagine, I haven't even looked, Liberal media is probably tearing this apart. It's racist. It's bigoted. You can't say that about this. You can't call Tim Walz that. You can't call Ilhan Omar that. And Trump is literally saying, we're not going to allow, and this is very important, right? Political correctness or liberal suicidal empathy, which we describe and talk about all the time, to override the common sense duty that a government actually has to protect its own citizens and make actions and perform duties that better and protect their own citizens, you know? But anyways, even as we have progressed technologically, immigration policy has eroded those gains and living conditions for many. I will permanently pause migration from all third world countries to allow the U.S. system to fully recover, terminate all the millions of Biden illegal admissions, including those signed by Sleepy Joe Biden's auto pen, and remove anyone who is not a net asset to the United States or is incapable of loving our country, end all federal benefits and subsidies to non-citizens of our country, denaturalize migrants who undermine domestic tranquility, and deport any foreign national who is a public charge, security risk, or non-compatible with Western civilization. So in other words, you're a radical jihadi, you're a communist, you're importantly a public charge, which means you're on welfare, you're on government benefits, you're a security risk because you're a so-called vetted Biden migrant. We're not dealing with it anymore, is what he's saying. And he's also further, basically, whatever this means, right, permanently pausing all third world migration. I think there's a list of like 10, 20 countries or something that were provided. In other words, no more of these refugees from countries that clearly are going to commit terrorism against us. Yeah, I know. Crazy that that's a political debate, but it has been for the past decade if you've been paying attention. These goals will be pursued with the aim of achieving a major reduction in illegal and disruptive populations. There's a per capita rate, and it's very high in certain ones, right, from certain countries, including those admitted through an unauthorized and illegal auto pen approval process. Only reverse migration can fully cure this situation. Other than that, happy Thanksgiving to all, except those that hate, steal, murder, and destroy everything that America stands for. You won't be here for long. So I'm sure, obviously, woke judges are going to try to get in the way of this, but assuming this can go through, okay? Definitely long overdue. Should have been the national policy, obviously, to begin with, and it turns out as well. Here was Stephen Miller announcing it's not just in terms of illegal migrants anymore at this point. We also need to review most of the legal visas that are given out because clearly there seems to be a systemic problem here. Take a listen.
Biden administration, the Democrats have inflicted on this nation the worst national security threat in our history. We've never faced a threat like this. 20 million people brought into our country from the most failed societies on earth. Afghanistan, Somalia, Libya, Iraq, brought here. No vetting, no conditions, no rules. Brought here on visas, brought here as refugees, brought here as asylees, brought here as illegals. Brought here in every way imaginable, by plane, train, bus, automobile, by land, by sea. For 4 straight years, they deluged this country. And now more blood is being spilled as a result. What you heard tonight from President Trump, the breaking news here tonight, is saying that his government is going to accelerate efforts to review every person added to this country over the last 20 years, or the last 4 years, all 20 million. Now, obviously, if you're illegal, you're out automatically. But everybody else who is brought here, refugee, asylum status, whatever status, as he said, if you're not someone who loves this country, if you're not any benefit to this country, then we're going to send you out of this country because it's enough already. No one else has to die. No one else has to be murdered. No one else has to be shot. No more empty seats are needed at the Thanksgiving table or the Christmas table because of what Democrats have done to this country. So tonight we heard from a commander-in-chief a historic announcement, a brave announcement, exactly what America needed to hear, Kellyanne.
Right, exactly as we've been saying on this channel for many months now. And let me say, it's not just an action that's long overdue. This is 9/11 long overdue, right? You want to talk about never forget or finally writing the record of what we did in response to all of that? Let's not forget. And I think it gets ignored a lot. But a huge component of 9/11 is fundamentally an immigration story. How did they get into this country? Why were those people given visas? Why was there never a reasonable expectation that, hey, maybe people coming from parts of the Middle East that have heavy ratios of jihadi and Islamist beliefs will come to this country and likely cause problems here, right? Because again, what was the slogan? Fight them over there so we don't have to fight them over here. Well, that doesn't really seem all that compatible if you bring them over here, doesn't it? Right? What should have been done the day after 9/11 was exactly this, right? A pausing of all migration from these countries, a closing of the borders, which Bush basically never did because he was a neocon, obviously. And yes, a reviewing of basically, if we can get to it, almost all the visas in this country, right? Just make sure it's legitimate. Make sure they're not sucking money out of the tax system because they're not supposed to be, technically, by what they sign when they get the green card, right? So you gotta do all this stuff. And it's shocking that, you know, despite all of the patriotic fervor back then, the Bush administration took that political capital and said, what? Oh, let's go do Iraq and let's do the Patriot Act. But let's never solve the fundamental problem here, which is clearly a foreign-born ideology and a foreign-born problem is infiltrating this country. And maybe we should actually take steps to prevent that instead of encourage it. So I don't know, just some thoughts I have. But anyways, let me know your thoughts on this move in the comment section down below. It's exciting. What do you think of the Trump statement? Let me know. Be sure to leave a like on this video. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. Prayers out to those National Guards members. I know the female one apparently has just passed away. Our condolences are with her family. We're praying for the male soldier who's still in critical condition right now. It's a tragic and horrible situation. And the infuriating part is that it's preventable, right? It's totally preventable. So let me know your thoughts. Leave a like down below. Subscribe. God bless and peace.